So good morning, everybody. So welcome to day 76 of compassionate response to COVID-19 with Mahaprabha. So yeah, I've been doing these sessions since Boris Johnson, the UK Prime Minister, announced no gatherings policy in the UK about 4 months ago, and so I've been kind of exploring Buddhism as a way of helping people with the crisis, and done a number of series now. So many of them were on different aspects of Buddhism: mindfulness, ritual, friendship, coping with isolation. These sort of topics. And then the current series, the inspiration book is called Meet the Order. So I'm a member of the Triratna Buddhist Order, and founded by an Englishman called Sangharakshita in the 1960s. It used to be called the Western Buddhist Order, and he founded an order which is neither monastic nor lay, based on the idea that everybody can practice Buddhism. Really, in the East, the tendency is to think that for people to think that it's the monks who practice Buddhism, and everybody else just supports the monks, or and they get merit from doing that. But this isn't really what the Buddha taught. He taught that anybody can practice Buddhism. So Sangharakshita emphasised this when he set up his order in the 1960s, the Western Buddhist Order, and so the central act of a Buddhist act is something called going for refuge. A Buddhist goes for refuge, in a way, goes for protection to three things: the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. They're called the three jewels because they're the three most precious things in Buddhism. So it's to the extent that somebody does that, they commit themselves to Buddhism and the teachings and the community of Buddhists, and to try to gain enlightenment, and for the sake of all sentient beings, and Mahayana terminology, that this is what makes them a Buddhist. So for this reason, the Western, what used to be called the Western Buddhist Order, is now called the Triratna, the Three Jewels Buddhist Order, has a number of individuals who are all going for refuge effectively to the Three Jewels. So their commitment is, it's effective. It's like they're effective Buddhists, but in a way they still need to keep the conditions in place to get further and to make that concrete, and to get to what's called real going for refuge, where they become independent and they can't fall back from becoming enlightened. So this means that order members, so I'm an order member, and Mahaprabha, I'm interviewing today, is an order member, kind of express their going for refuge in different ways. And some people will work in a Buddhist centre and help run classes in a Buddhist centre and be the kind of face of Buddhism to the local population. Some people will be artists or scholars and be working on a particular area. They have a sort of a kind of love of maybe the details of things, or they might be kind of serious meditators. And some people work in the world. Some people express their Buddhism through a kind of path of responsibility and taking responsibility. So Mahaprabha is one of these people doing it on that path. So Mahaprabha, I've known Mahaprabha since the early 90s, and we were in a group together training for ordination, and he got ordained 4 years before me in 1994, and I got ordained in 97, 3 years before me. So we were together at the West London Buddhist Centre, and at the time he was in business and as a strategy director for large multinational company, and then he got ordained and he came back, and he ended up becoming professor at London Business School. So he's an internationally renowned business strategist. So it'd be really interesting to have a chat with Mahaprabha later on, hear about his exploits and his various books. He's got one called Mindfulness and Money, which was 2002, and his current co-authorship is on a book called what was it? What philosophy can teach you about being a better leader. So there you go. So this is what we've got later on. But first of all, we're going to do a bit of body work and then some meditation. Then Mahaprabhu is going to join us just after 8. Okay, so we'll begin by doing some doing from the Japanese tradition. So do means way. So it's a kind of form of self-massage. So we'll just begin by just drumming with your fingers on top of your head. And being aware of contact of your feet with the ground, the sensations that you're experiencing in your body as your body's touching your clothing and the air and the moisture evaporating from your skin, and listening to the sounds of the drumming of your fingers. And take some deeper breaths. Opening your chest. And rub your hands together. And put your arms, Squeeze your hands together. So we're just trying to wake our body up. And the principle is clear that, I think lots of business people do have quite serious exercise regimes, because to maintain, to bring anything about in the world, we've got to have a mind that's bright and clear. But that brightness of mind doesn't come about if our body's in a kind of sluggish sort of state. So mind and body are kind of connected all the time. So I always do some of this doing before leading a meditation, because otherwise you sit down and just experience a sort of stodginess, and the mind starts sinking. And it can't really pay attention in the same sort of way as if the body is bright and stimulated and is supportive of it. Okay. And then just put your cradle your forehead in the palms of your hands. And just curving your spine over, so it's like you're turning away, like curling up into kind of fetal position, turning away from the world. So you don't have to be expressing anything with your face. Or saying anything with your voice. You just can let everything just quieten down. So often we need to turn inward and replenish ourselves, just like the planet does with the seasons. You need the winter time for things to damp down and settle down, and then the growth starts happening later in the year. So we all need to be turning inward at certain points of the day. And then just give your face a bit of a wash with your hands. With the body, we often need to do things slowly because it doesn't respond as quickly as the mind. The mind is quite mercurial and it is just thought, it's just electricity, isn't it? But the body needs more time if we're going to work with it. So just taking your time, being patient. Can you shake hands and feet out? Okay, then just cradle your elbow in the palm of your hand and then going over the top, giving the top of your spine, top of your shoulder, a bit of stimulation. So again, what people can tend to do with this is just go through the motions of something, but just looking at what your body actually wants to happen. Maybe try doing it twice as hard as you are doing. Of course, you need to take responsibility if you have any health conditions. Just only do what you can do. Just really try to wake up the top of your back and top of your spine. And the other side. And down the outside of your arm and onto the back of your hand and make it a bit painful. Get your fingers. As you get underneath the level of tension that's there. And then palms of your hands. And then up the arm inside. And the other side. palms. The inside. If you get a bit tired, just do it a bit slower. And then the chest. And then circling on your stomach. And just drumming lightly on your kidneys at the back. And then on your buttocks and backs of your legs. And down your legs as far as you can go. And shaking everything out. And then just taking a seat for meditation. Okay, so this morning we're going to do a grounding meditation. Which is to bring awareness to our situation. So just getting used to being in this seated position. Feeling the contact of your body with the chair or the cushions you're sitting on and the floor. Just allowing your body to calm down. So what we're looking for is we're looking for a situation where our body is just sitting here. We don't need to be using any attention to hold it up. Just to make sense that your body knows how to sit down. It doesn't need any help from your mind to do that. And all you need to do is just balance your spine so that the weight's going down. You're not leaning over, so your weight's going as directly down into the ground as it can. So let's just look at our situation. So what is our situation at the moment? So our situation is that we're a human being who exists in time and space. So first of all, being aware of time, just having a sense of all the moments that you've experienced in the past. So Buddhism is about overcoming suffering. And if we're to overcome suffering for ourselves and for other people, we basically need two things. We need two qualities. We need to have loving kindness. We need to want happiness for ourselves and want it for others. And that's something we can cultivate. And we also need mindfulness. And mindfulness is the thing that tells us how to bring happiness about. We bring awareness to our situation. See what that situation is. We try and turn things that are sources of suffering to being sources of happiness. Just being mindful of our actual situation can bring us a sense of reassurance. At least we know what's happening. So knowing that we exist in time can actually give us a sense of having time. So being aware of the future, all the moments that you will experience in the future. And what else is the case? It's also the case that right now we all exist in a particular moment in time, which is the present moment. So just becoming aware of that, letting it dawn on you that this is where you are in time, here in the present moment. So gradually arriving into that present moment. So So we're just being aware that we exist in time. Our lives right now are existing in the present moment. And it's also the case that we exist in space. So we're sitting on the Earth, which is a huge ball of matter flying through space. So if your mind is busy, just imagine putting it to one side just for now while we stay aware of these facts, like the fact we exist in space, on the Earth. Just feeling the contact of your body with the Earth, experiencing the Earth. In your imagination. So it's also the case that there's the atmosphere above your head, which is about 10 miles thick. Just waiting for the reality of that to dawn on you. And beyond the atmosphere is vast empty space. Where every now and then there might be a star or a galaxy, but not very often. Absolutely huge distances out there. So, as with anything in meditation, we're trying to do something in meditation, we often just have to give it time, so just being patient. Waiting for yourself to arrive into this awareness of space. And the earth is covered in oceans and ice caps and forests, cities, deserts, jungle, farmland. And you're in a particular place on the earth. So again, just waiting for yourself to arrive into that place where you actually are. So what else can we say is the case? Well, it's the case that we always have a body with us, which is a physical object in the physical world. And that body has a particular structure to it, so it's got bones that support the body's weight and muscles that move the body about, organs that keep it alive. So just tuning into the structure of your actual body, trying to see where the bones are, where the muscles are, where the organs are. And aligning yourself with that reality, so trying to just let your body just sit there. It knows how to sit down. It doesn't need any help from your mind to do that. And then just balancing your spine so that the weight of the body goes down into the ground. Try to not lean over it in any direction, because otherwise you'll have to use tension to hold yourself up. And then if the skeleton of the body is taking the weight, the muscles can just relax. So relaxation is a physical thing. It's just like unfurling a fist. So if your muscles of your body feel confident, they'll be supported, they can just soften and relax. And just imagine shedding any tension from your body as if it's falling away towards the ground. And tuning in with how you feel at the moment. Just having a sense that your body can support your mind and emotions to be in whatever state that they're in. And the fact that your body's there underneath them can just give them a greater sense of stability and reassurance. And if you feel any restlessness, just give that to your body to be held. So in your own time, just bringing that meditation to a close. So here we are.
Well, good morning, Mahabodhi.
Good morning. Yeah, how are you doing?
Good. Well, not so bad at the moment. You're looking very well.
Yeah, I'm all right. Yeah. Well, I go a bit crazy sometimes with this lockdown. I'm living on my own. Yeah.
How have you been finding it?
Well, doing these sessions has been a good way of occupying myself. But
Hmm.
I think being on my own and it's been a lot of time now. Since I stopped work and stuff.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm furloughed from my cleaning job on a building site. So yeah. But, yeah, it's just how it is, isn't it? Yeah. But yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. How have you been coping with it?
Well, we've been, we're in a beautiful place. So before lockdown, my partner Lucas and I, went up to Scotland, to the Isle of Skye, and I was planning to be here for probably just a few weeks, getting some writing done. And
Yeah.
then when lockdown happened, there we were, and it's a very good
Yeah.
place to be stuck, although it is very isolated. So
Yeah.
we're in a little, I wouldn't even call it a village, it's a little township that we're on the edge of,
Yeah.
with a few houses, but people, very sensitive to transmission of the virus. So everyone has tended to keep themselves to themselves, waving from a distance.
Yeah.
And then we go into the local large village, which is a 60-mile round trip,
Yeah.
once a week to do the shopping. And those are the human beings who we see in the flesh.
Yeah.
Although latterly, I'd say in the last 3 weeks, we've been tending to see more of neighbours in a social distancing way, having a cup of tea or a drink over the wall, which has been very nice. But it's the longest period I've spent here by a long way. I had probably about 2.5 months when I was looking after my mum in Scotland towards the end of her life, about a bit over 20 years ago. But this has been the longest stretch. And I have to say I've loved it, because I would have been herring around the place otherwise.
Yeah.
So it's also the longest stretch where I've actually stayed put in one place for at least, probably since we were in Guyaloka,
Yeah.
1994.
Yeah.
And I've really enjoyed it. It's much harder for my partner Lucas because I've got lots of things I can engage with in terms of reading, writing, connecting with people like you in this way on Zoom. And I've been doing a lot of Zoom-based teaching and webinars. For Lucas, it's much harder because his work is very much face-to-face and has to be face-to-face. But where we're fortunate is we have a bit of land, a croft, and there's a woodland which we've been developing and looking after for the last 20 years, and that's become lovely. And so we've been planting trees and clearing bracken, all of those kind of things with the hands.
Yeah.
In my case, with a massive petrol-powered brush cutter. So I get out there with my steel helmet and visor to slash through the undergrowth.
Okay.
It's very satisfying. And
Yeah.
our chapter's very good, and actually in some ways works better on Zoom. Well, there's more continuity.
Right. Yeah.
And then I meet up with friends like Sona and Padma Singha once a week.
Yeah.
And then there are other friends outside the Buddhist world who I
Yeah.
connect with pretty regularly.
Yeah. So the reason I'm doing these sessions is it's like I want to share with the wider world, because this will end up on YouTube. The lives of various order members. And there's quite a range of order members in the people in the order. And at the beginning of this session, I said about the whole thing of being in the order. It's like people do different things, and the thing we have in common is we're all going for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. But we express that in very different ways. And like we were together in West London Buddhist Centre, weren't we, in the early 90s? And
I'm from 1989, so it's now, believe it or not, just over 30 years.
Yeah. It was 88 I came along.
Yeah.
And I've had some sessions with. I've had Stira Prabha, and you remember Dave Ford?
Oh yeah.
Well, I've had him on. Yeah, so we've been reminiscing about West London Centre. I've had Paramanda on.
Of course.
Yeah, and it's been really nice, and I've been remembering people as well. Like I've shared on previous sessions, I've shared bits of audio of me and Jinanda talking for like 10 minutes. And just really wanting to capture people, because it's people, isn't it? That's what convinces you to want to be involved in something. It's the people.
Yeah. Well, we were a very good little crowd in the West London Buddhist Centre back in the early 90s.
Yeah.
And I see quite a lot. I see a lot of Papamati. The former Stephen Coates, as he was.
Yeah.
Because he ended up marrying my mother's best friend's granddaughter.
Really?
Here in Scotland.
Yeah.
Here in Scotland. So we got kind of intertwined in that way as well.
Okay.
Which is great.
I'm
godparent or guardian, as we probably call it, to Mati's daughter, Poppy, who's now nearly 14.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
So so I'm more on the kind of artistic side and meditation teacher side of things, and I'm aware that there's a group of order members who are more on the business side of things. So there's you, and there's like Kulananda, and actually in the world of like Pamamati's he's a successful musician, isn't he?
Exactly.
Yeah. So people who are really kind of successful in the world, There's a bit of a group of you, isn't there? Yeah.
I'd call it engaging with the world, because if I think of Kulananda, who's remained a very good friend, I'd like to see more of him. But I would say he's not a business person. He's a mindfulness teacher.
Yeah.
But he's a mindfulness teacher who's been engaging a lot with people in their workplace.
Yeah.
And he's also taken mindfulness in a secular direction, but he's well known to be a Buddhist. So he had a little group which he called Mindfulness for Coaches.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of people who do coaching work out there in the business or organizational work.
Yeah.
And they have to deal with people who are sometimes a bit chewed up, and it can be very stressful doing that kind of work yourself.
Yeah.
Even though it can be very worthwhile as well.
Yeah.
So he was supporting people like that, and then he wrote a really good book called Mindfulness for Coaches.
Yeah.
Which I find has had a lot of impact at sort of second, third, fourth, fifth hand. So there are people I work with who are coaches who say, there's this really good book written by this Buddhist guy, Michael Taskalson, called Mindfulness for Coaches. Come across it. So he's done, and again, you've got our friends at Breathworks, and Sona, who's one of the Breathworks founders and a very old friend, Roptin Prasadu, who
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
of course,
Well, I want to
extremely
get
well.
Prasadu on here. It's difficult, but I'm
Yeah.
trying to get him. Yeah,
But I think breathworks is another great example of people
yeah,
getting
yeah,
out and engaging with the world and
yeah,
helping people in particular deal with chronic pain.
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've got this is Kulananda's book. One of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can we say that? Yeah,
I can
mindfulness
see
in
that
eight
very well.
weeks. And
Yeah.
he's very clear, isn't he? It's like a lot of the courses are 8 week courses, so he just says mindfulness in 8 weeks.
Yeah.
And I think I think one of his real strengths is that just clarity and that sort of thing. Yeah, yeah. So can we sort of go back a bit to your past and just explore your life a bit, and then let's. So do you want to
Of course.
say a
Well,
bit about your upbringing and things? Whoops.
so, every time we tell a life story, it probably comes out rather differently because telling the story is part of the story, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But it was quite a mixed background. So my mum was a single woman. In effect, she was married briefly to my dad, and I was born. In fact, were you a Lancashire boy originally?
No, Yorkshire. How dare you?
You were Yorkshire. I'm so sorry. Well, it's up there, up north. Anyway, I was born in Liverpool. Although
Oh,
you
yeah.
from my
Right.
accent,
Okay.
I was indeed. And in fact, in my early years, I spent a lot of time near Liverpool. More probably half brought up by my grandmother. But it was a situation where my mum was not well off, but I had a rich and very distant dad, which created a certain dynamic around issues to do with wealth. My mum was quite left wing in her own way. She had never actually been a communist, but she'd been a member of organisations like the Peace Pledge Union
Right.
in the late 1930s. She was very suspicious of the business world in many ways, and also very suspicious of organised religion, and which was interesting. So she
Yeah.
really encouraged me
Yeah.
to think for myself.
Yeah.
I went to private schools, but to do that, it was probably she might have got my mum to pay for she might have got my dad to pay for an education, but I was lucky enough to be very well taught, so I got scholarships to really good schools, which meant that education came for free. But that also created an interesting dynamic, which was the kind of traditional British boarding school, public school as we call them,
Yeah.
that I went to,
Yeah.
was one which really emphasized service. So the idea of going into business was seen as a bit off.
Right.
And in fact, you should aspire to be an academic, you should aspire to be a religious minister, you should aspire to be a senior civil servant,
Yeah.
you should get out there and serve and do good.
Yeah.
And so that then became a very important part of my upbringing, which I rather rebelled against early on. So in my early university days, I thought, heck, I want to live life, I want to make some money. So I embarked on a business career, initially working in Asia, in Japan. But there was a curious twist in that, because my very first boss was in fact a practicing Buddhist, a British guy, very traditional British guy, 6'3", ex-Coldstream Guards, Eton and all the rest of it. But he was a disciple of a friend of Sangharakshita's, and the individual in question was called Marco Pallas, who Sangharakshita knew well when they were all living in Kalimpong, on the border with Tibet. And Marco Pallas was one of these polymaths. He was a mountain climber, he was a concert performing violinist, and a guru. So Peter, my first boss, was not intending to convert me, but I got on very well with him, and he introduced me to a poet, an Australian poet called Harold Stewart, who was living in Kyoto in Japan, in one of the Shingon temple grounds in a tea house. And Peter introduced me to Harold, who invited me down to Kyoto. And he was this lovely old Australian gent in a cardigan. And we went for strolls through the back streets of Kyoto. His main occupation was translating haiku, those very short Japanese poems. And that was starting to awaken me to, another dimension.
What year was this then?
What all about. We're talking about me being probably 23 years old at that time.
Yeah.
About 23. But there'd been, that kind of interplay going right the way back between very much admiring my dad, who was right out there in the world of business, very successful engineer, and then my mum, who was saying, well, actually, there are other things in life. So there was a certain oscillation between the two.
Yeah.
And then I went off when I was 25, I'm giving information away here, valuable information about age. I was 1983, we're talking about 6 years before I met you. I went off to business school in the United States, to Stanford Business School, which is a very good one, which opens many doors. And so I was looking for that to open doors to a successful business career, which it did in many ways. But then there was something a bit subversive that I came across, because there was an interesting guy called Mike Ray, who wrote a book which I think you've read, Mahabodhi, called Creativity in Business. You've got it there. Yeah. I've kept in touch with Mike. I've kept in touch with Mike slightly, who's always been interested to see what the subsequent stories were. And Creativity in Business was a bit of a Trojan horse as a course, because Mike taught us to meditate. And we were given assignments, which you'll have seen in that book, to live by for a week. For example, spend a week paying attention to things and see what happens, or spend a day on your own, or spend an hour looking at natural running water in a stream or river or the sea. And that was an absolute eye-opener for me. I was lucky enough then to be living in a very beautiful place in the hills of Stanford, very close to the meditation center, Sakoji, which friends like Paramananda would use for retreats, and still does when he was based in San Francisco. And we were right up in the hills, wonderful smell of bay leaves, stars. I was sharing a house with some really good mates. It was the first time, actually, I'd had that kind of experience of just being really natural. And it was a wonderful year. And the Creativity in Business package, we might say, the taster of meditation, the just letting yourself experience what's around you, that was quite transformational. So life then continued to go in two, I would say, parallel directions, not necessarily conflicting, sometimes so. And so following Stanford, I followed a well-beaten path of those who've done MBAs in business schools of that kind, into the world of strategy consulting, giving organizations advice on strategy, what to do in the future, what to be in the future, how to get there. A firm called the Boston Consulting Group, which took me into many, many places. But along the way, I looked up an advert in a magazine called Time Out, because I wanted to follow up the Creativity in Business experience. And the advert I saw was an advert for the West London Buddhist Centre. And so I rang them up, and I think I spoke to Jnananda, who, in his rather elegant patrician drawl, suggested I come to the next meeting, and who should I meet? Mahabodhi, but you.
Right.
So that's a kind of an early chapter which got me into contact with organized Buddhism at that point.
Yeah. So it's interesting, isn't it, that you've had these, like, well, as you say, these parallel kind of courses, like the business side, the business thing on the one side, and then the kind of more reflective, a mindfulness side on the other. Yeah.
Then the question is, of course, how do you integrate them? And that became, a big project, I would call it, for me.
Yeah.
Because riding two horses,
Yeah.
sometimes going different directions,
Yeah. Yeah.
can be pretty tiring.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then there were other issues. So, at that time, I was certainly not out as a gay man, but I was working in a world which, at that time, I probably didn't give that world the benefit of the doubt as much as I might have done. But I feared it was homophobic in the workplace. People were still making gay jokes. I kept myself very much to myself from that
Yeah.
standpoint.
Yeah.
And so that was another aspect of not being so integrated. So there was a kind of turning point there. First of all, in fact, several turning points. So I can remember on one Buddhist retreat, someone who these days I've got a huge respect for, but we were all very young. This guy said to me on the retreat, he said, you're never going to get ordained as a Buddhist unless you chuck it all in. You're going to have to get out of this worldly stuff and just go for it properly, like I'm doing, he said. So I then had a chat shortly after that, with Sona, who's a very good friend,
Yeah.
who is my preceptor, who's been a wonderful guide through life. In quite a subtle way, actually.
Yeah.
He's never told me what to do.
No.
Although in this particular case, he did. He said, I hope you told this guy where to get off. It's none of his business.
Yeah.
And I'm too polite to tell people where to get off.
Yeah.
But I did take what Sona said to heart. And
Yeah.
he said, you have to find your own way.
Yeah.
And in fact, if someone is not finding their own way, but following someone else's way, then it actually raises all sorts of questions about whether the path they're following is sustainable and going to lead them to a difficult place. So that was a very important message. And not long after that, I did go on our ordination retreat, which was another wonderful experience of living a life where everything came together. It was very reminiscent of that final year at Stanford, in fact, in a place which was physically not so different, high up in the mountains, in a gorgeous valley. There was a lot of resonance there. And of course, it was only 10 years after my time in North California. But a little bit after being ordained as a Buddhist, my mother became terminally ill, and there was no way I was going to put her in a fairly long illness. So one option was for me to keep on doing everything I was doing. In fact, dare I say it, one of my Buddhist friends suggested that the best place for my mother would be a residential home, because if I was looking after her, I wouldn't be able to fulfill my other duties. And I'm very glad I didn't follow that steer. And so what I did do was actually to cut back on all of those work and organised Buddhist activities, because I was doing a lot of work at the West London Buddhist Centre at that time to look after my mum, which was probably one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life.
What year was this then?
We're talking now about 1997, 1998.
Right.
And in fact, I looked after her in the Isle of Skye in Scotland, where I've been in lockdown currently. Tremendous gifts came from that, actually, because if you are very close to someone who's going through the dying process, it does to a degree alleviate the fear of death, because you can see what it's about. And in fact, I remember talking to my mother's oncologist, and he said he had a lot of patients who came from wealthy families, and wealth often goes together with busyness. So patients who had children who were extremely busy with childcare or their professional work, and they put their mum in a home. But he said the price they'd pay for that often would be fear themselves, because maybe that would happen to them eventually, but also they wouldn't really know what it was all about. Of course, you never know what it's all about, but at least you have some sense of what fears are like and what the limits of fear might be. So that was an extraordinary gift. But then in a more hands-on way, some of my Buddhist friends dropped everything to come and help me. One of my very close friends, who I'd had a weird relationship with, who became a Roman Catholic priest, actually also dropped everything to come and help me. here in the Isle of Skye. And the kind of big takeaway I took from my mum is, life is so incredibly precious. Don't waste it by burning up your energy through going in too many different directions all at once. So that then became a really important reminder that I needed to bring the worldly world, quote unquote, and the spiritual world much, much more together. So that meant coming out. So it meant literally coming out in the context of sexual orientation, but also coming out as a Buddhist. Some of that work was done for me, by the way, because I had a client who was a very senior partner at PwC, the advisory firm. And he said to me one day, we're talking probably now about 1999, 2000, he said, I've been doing some digging into you. He said, I can see, there's all this kind of strategy stuff that you're bringing, because I was doing strategy teaching at London Business School at that point as a part-time faculty member, and also had my own advisory practice. He said, this is all the plain vanilla stuff. But he said, I can see all these really interesting things about you. Tell me about how you became a Buddhist. And I thought, oh no, these things don't belong together. But in fact, they did. Yeah. And then there was another client of mine who had a senior human resource or learning and development role at SAP, the German software firm. And he said, there are a lot of things about you that we know, and we really like them. And so I thought, gosh, these worlds can come together. Now, clearly there's some selection bias, because there might well have been people who might have wanted to engage my professional services who'd looked me up on Google, and you can immediately see that I'm a practicing Buddhist, that I've written books which have got business, but also Buddhist Dharmic application. So there'll be people who just say, "Ooh, what's this weirdness?" and I'd never hear from them. So there is selection bias, but I think that's fine. And again, what I find in my current work, in fact, just yesterday, Mahabodhi, I was doing something just like this to 400 of my students, or with 400 of my students, with some colleagues. So there was a panel discussion on how to make $1 million. And I was giving, I slightly ducked that question. But we had a conversation very much along these lines about how to integrate different aspects of what we care about, how to integrate what we really love to do with what we have to do, how aspiration and duty need to come together. These are profoundly dharmic in my view. So I certainly wouldn't claim to have cracked it, but the track I try to be on is one of being the same person, albeit in very different contexts. So I want to be the same person in our Order chapter meeting as I am, let's say, in the London Business School lecture theatre.
Well, that's a kind of that's a real relevant goal for you, isn't it? If you've got these two strands that are kind of like parallel, to be the one person. I can see that.
We'll see where we go in the future, because I'm like you, I'm getting to a certain age, and
exactly.
I push no offense, but there's a question. What are we going to do, say, with the next? Because if we're blessed, maybe there's 15, even 20 years of active life. We're being reasonably on fairly close to being on full power energy-wise, if we're fortunate. And then the question is, what to do with that bounty of energy and health and time. And of course, I think it's a mistake to get too, should we speak about that, and lock yourself into a fixed plan. But I find there's more and more appetite for people to hear from me, let's say in a dharmic, or to secularize it, a more philosophical direction. With 3 co-authors back at the end of last year, we brought out a book entitled How or what philosophy can teach you about being a better leader, which you might have on your bookshelf, Mahabodhi.
I do. Well, I've got a picture of it.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And this was, absolutely to do with what any organisation and what leadership should be about, which is to help people to flourish.
Yeah.
One aspect of flourishing is economic, so you need to get the goods.
Yeah.
There's another aspect of flourishing which is psychological.
Yeah.
It's important to feel good at least some of the time.
Yeah.
But then the crucial aspect is what is good? What's the good life?
Yeah.
And how do you enable people to lead a good life? And the pandemic, by the way, has provided, I would say, a lot more interest in that question. So more specifically, it's sort of, what did you do in the pandemic? There was a time of crisis. How did you respond?
Mm.
And one philosopher we have in there, Friedrich Nietzsche, who had quite a lot of influence on our movement one way or another. Nietzsche was saying that in a time of crisis, you can either respond with what he called nihilism, or you can embark on your own search for the good. And that's, again, very much what's been sparked in my mind by the crisis we're in right now.
Does it mean passive nihilism? The kind of, that's all we can do. There's nothing we can do. That sort of thing. Yeah. Yeah.
That's right. Because again, without wanting to get too locked into a riff on Nietzsche, where he talked about one concern of his about nihilism was it's the loss of hope, despair in civilization and society, which he could see coming, and he wasn't far wrong. And his big fear was the war of all against all, where people would just give up on the idea of close bonds to other human beings, go for what they can get for themselves. And he was lucky not to see the cycle of wars in the 20th century, which in many ways he prophesied. But the other form of nihilism, as you say, is passive nihilism. He called that the herd mentality, where you just go along with the herd.
Yeah.
And I think in our movement, our teacher Sangharajta talked a lot about becoming an individual, and rather than just a member of the group.
Yeah.
And from that standpoint, you could say just going along with the group is nihilistic in a passive sense. And again, there are lots of ways of misunderstanding the idea of an individual. It doesn't mean someone who has to be perched on top of a mountain all on their own, like Zarathustra in Nietzsche's philosophy. But it does mean someone who has, let's say, made the effort to work things out for themselves, and choose teachers wisely, and choose companions on the way in a mindful manner.
Yeah. Could I just ask you, the kind of burning question in my mind is, so you spend you've been very involved in business, haven't you, for a long time, and in strategy, and so what is strategy? And why that? Why that? What's the passion there behind? What is the passion behind business?
Well, let's start. Well, first of all,
question.
Business is actually any organised set of activities that draw people together with some kind of shared goal. So from that standpoint, a religious movement is a business. I'm involved in a religious movement. A charity is a business. I'm on the boards of several charities, including Karanar Trust, which is a superb Buddhist inspired charity, as well as Breathworks, which we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
And they are businesses in the sense that they take in money, they organise activities, they can't run at a loss. Whether or not you make a profit, I think, is very much a second order question. Then you have public sector bodies, and then you have limited companies with limited liability, which are what probably most people would think of as businesses. But frankly, I don't really distinguish between them. they're all about organized human activity towards an end. And then the strategy piece, Mahabodhi, is then precisely about the end.
Yeah.
So when I think about strategy, a strategy is looking to address three questions. What do you really want to become? And why, of course, and what's the reasoning behind that?
Yeah.
What do you want to become? How are you going to get there? And then back to the why, the really crucial question. Why do you want this anyway?
Yeah.
So, for example, people might say in shorthand, well, you need a strategy in order to be successful. But what does success actually mean?
Yeah.
And that's the kind of question I like to invite people I work with to really probe.
Yeah.
But to do that, you need to keep a balance, which is to say, there's the more, shall we say, philosophical question, why are we doing it anyway? But at the same time, people need some practical guidance on, what am I actually going to do? Please give me a little bit of help with that. And if I'm in a mess, how do I get out of it? So you can't neglect the how questions. And getting a lot of clarity and focus on the what is also very important, because sometimes you can have organizations that have very lofty aspirations to make the world a better place, but actually they're hellish places to work in because no one really knows what they're specifically meant to do. So that's why I find strategy really engaging, because on a good day, it's all about unifying and integrating our activities. We don't just go all over the place, wasting the precious gifts we have in terms of energy.
Yeah. So, I started doing this thing called Miracle Morning, which is like, I've got this book called Miracle Morning for Millionaires, and the idea is that you get up in the morning in 5 seconds, and like and you got to kind of wash your face, and then you do all sorts of different things like reading, writing, meditation, affirmations. There's a whole load of things. And the idea is that you start the day with this really enthusiastic idea of what you're trying to do for the day, and you kind of fill yourself with inspiration, and rather than just kind of getting up and going, oh, what. So
there you go. There's your strategy for you and the impact it can have.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to get at here is that the business people I know, in businessy type people I know in the order, are very sharp and clear and energetic, and so I'm just sort of trying to get at the thing of like, well, the world needs to be organised in a certain sort of way, doesn't it? Things need to be organised, and there'll be lots of like liberal type people who'll be going, just taking all that for granted and thinking, oh, money will come from somewhere, in a vague sort of way, So what I'm trying to get at is like, is your drive that you want things to work in the best possible way, the most efficient way, that life, like things are organised, and things are clear.
Absolutely, but not just for its own sake. I mean,
exactly. So it's like,
in seeing things work well, but in the end, it's about flourishing. What does it take to help people flourish? And that means, in some senses, running a tight ship.
Yeah. So in a way, like, business is not an option, is it? It's not like you can have a world without business. You need to have business there in some way or other, isn't it? It's one sort of business or another, isn't it? So
now there is one catch in that. So I'm absolutely with you, which is if we're in any way organised towards an end, we are business people. But there's another catch in the word business, because it can also be read as busyness. So it is very important for us to, if you like, be a little bit schizophrenic here, because if everything is pinned down, carefully planned, carefully structured, you will close off the unexpected, serendipity.
Yeah.
You'll narrow your field of view for the sake of being really clear and really
yeah,
focused.
yeah, yeah,
And we do this in meditation. So we talk about breadth and focus,
yeah,
and we need both. So we need to be able to bring our awareness to a point, but then also we need to be able to
yeah,
sit and take in with breadth everything that's happening.
yeah,
And I believe very strongly there's an analogy here because in the world of strategy, we sometimes talk about the distinction between deliberate strategy, where you've got a clearly defined goal, clear plan to get there, and everyone has a really good understanding of the purpose. But then there's something else called emergent strategy, which happens when you don't really quite know where you're going, where you're open to surprises,
yeah,
where you are willing to make sense of what emerges in a very unpredictable world.
yeah,
And if you're going to be doing that, actually, you need a lot of the kind of skills that we would like to believe we teach, for example, in meditation practice,
yeah,
which is to do with just sitting with the
yeah,
emotions that arise, um, understanding where there's an immediate reaction. So breadth and focus, I think, have their parallels from the
yeah,
world
yeah,
of meditation
yeah,
in that world of business or busyness.
yeah, yeah,
And if
yeah,
it's just busyness and there's no space,
yeah.
it's not going to be great.
Yeah. So I remember you telling me about this workshop that you've done, which is about coping with change or something. So you get people to build a building out of drinking straws or something like that, and
Oh,
the turtle.
there are a lot of these games which
Yeah,
can
yeah,
be number one rather fun, and which can also have some very valuable learning points. And I think there, and I don't do quite enough of it, but when you're teaching, or let's put it differently, creating a learning experience, the old traditional idea is you give a lecture, and maybe there's Q&A at the end. So it's downloading information from the guru, the professor, the top lawyer, the consultant, to the others, and they all
yeah,
take notes. Um, there's quite a lot of work done on learning retention, and I forget the numbers, but people typically remember something like 15% of what um, someone else said, something like 40% of what they themselves said,
oh yeah,
and about 80% of what they actually experienced, with all of the emotional anchors associated with that.
mm,
So what I find these days in a learning process is, yes, you do need to give people a frame, which means some structure, some organizing ideas, but again, get them loose on an experience. So you could be talking about people's uncomfortableness with change and give a little lecture on that. But then if you give people an exercise, and the one you're thinking of, which, to be honest, I haven't used in a very, very long time because someone got rather annoyed with the exercise and I didn't dare do it again. It involved building a structure out of marshmallows and spaghetti.
really,
And initially, people were doing this in groups, and initially you would tell them to build the most beautiful structure they could, and then halfway through, you would tell them that they instead had to build the tallest structure. And you would get sort of 50-year-old senior executives potentially really, really upset by the change. An important thing, by the way, is not to let these exercises go on for too long. Otherwise, there comes a point, particularly with handheld devices, when people get onto their emails instead. But what one's looking to do in that way it is to create something similar to what we do in meditation practice, a representation of the real world, which is representation of the real world in a safe space. Another game which I've found very interesting in that context, which is to do, I guess, with empathy as much as anything else, is a game in which we create a hierarchy. So let's suppose there are 25 of you in the room. This was developed by an organizational psychologist called Barry Oshry. 25 people in the room. You divide them into 3 groups. Top people, maybe 5 top people, then 10 middle people, and let's enlarge it to 35 people in the room. And then 20 of them are then staff. So the 5 top people, and you can play some interesting variations on this by lining everyone up at the beginning in order of height. So you might pick the 5 tallest people and make them the top management. There's some validity in that, by the way, in terms of how height corresponds to selection in organizations. And you give them a lovely room with a beautiful view, coffee, croissants. Then the middle people are given an ordinary meeting room with flip charts and the rest of it. And then the staff are put down in the basement with no windows and a stack of metal chairs and dismantled tables. And you give them an assignment of arriving at a shared view on the nature of power and politics in organizations. And then you let it develop for an hour or so. And I can remember conducting this activity, admittedly with a colleague, because these are things that you might not want to do on your own. And one guy said, "I have never felt so humiliated in my life." And then one of the other people in the room said, "Now you know what it's like. You do this to us every day." And so, again, we managed to draw out, fortunately, a certain amount of humour. But again, the central point is about creating experience rather than telling people, because you could have given a 3-minute lecture on the same content, which would have gone completely over everyone's heads. So how do you? It's going back to the theme of integration. How do you integrate head and heart?
I mean, the reason I mentioned that, the exercise with the marshmallow thing, was that it really stuck in my mind, that, and I think it's really relevant to like now, because the situation in lockdown and the future, feels like that, that situation, that you've got this change happening, and we're all going to want to keep doing the same thing we've always done, aren't we?
Yeah. A lot of people are very much hoping we might be able to get back to normal, but I don't think we will.
No.
And of course, change is very frightening. And we could go through all of the reasons why that might be so. So if we can create taster experiences of change in a safe setting that we can learn from, we may at the very least be able to take some of the fear away, and we may even be able to create a more positive appetite for it. So, Mahaprabha, if I take myself, the coronavirus, because I'm employed, I'm part-time, I'm self-employed actually part-time. So the coronavirus has wiped out about 90% of my income for the year. I'm fortunate to have some savings, but it's a big financial hit, huge change. I probably will not be able to do very much of the kind of work I've been doing previously professionally, where I've worked with groups of people flying in from all over the world. That's not going to be a fun experience for people anymore. So I'm having to look at a huge change myself. I have to say I am very fortunate, because apart from having savings, I've got great resources in terms of friends, people who can reach out a helping hand. And also I'm very passionate about continuing more down that philosophy, why track. I'd like to go back to studying. Studying's a good thing to do in a recession. But it's also very frightening. Because identity is up in the air. So then, for me, like for others, what are the kind of practices which will help us, number one, put the fear in perspective, and then number two, maybe give us a bit of a feeling for adventure, because that's the flip side of change. You don't know quite what's going to happen. And depending on where you're coming from, That can be an invitation to adventure, as well as a horror ride.
Mm.
Um, that's not to be naive, because this is going to be an incredibly challenging time
Yeah.
as we look at the next few years for all of us, and the ramifications of the coronavirus are only
Yeah.
just starting to become apparent, and they're huge. Um, but
Yeah.
again, back to the question of change, you're absolutely right. Um, this is going to throw up so much of what we do, of who we are, and then how much can we have a bit of agency in how it all lands.
Yeah. 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 Well, I did a day, an order day in Manchester here, and Divan did it on the Buddha's view on death and or mindfulness of death. And he says the monk who thinks that he might die in 5 minutes, is being lazy, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and he pares it right down to the monk who thinks he might die in the next minute and then the next moment. So it's like what he's pointing at is like not assuming anything about anything, assuming that he might actually die like now, right now,
Mm-hmm.
and there's something about that I kind of find it's freeing in a certain sort of way, that
Yeah, and I'm absolutely with you. And the flip side of that, um, which I'm afraid is going to be the last point I can offer, because I'm going to be grabbed at 9 o'clock
okay,
by some students. But the flip side of that is to think, if each day is your last, then what an incredible gift it is,
yeah,
and how do you make the very most
yeah,
of that precious gift, whether we're talking about the last day or the
yeah,
last 5 minutes.
yeah. So it's
Well, look, it's
one
been
day at
lovely
a
to
time.
reconnect,
Yeah,
Mahabodhi,
yeah, yeah,
and I hope I'm delighted you're doing this, and I
yeah,
hope the sessions of value to
yeah,
some people.
yeah. Great, thank you. All right,
Great.
thanks a lot.
All the very best.
All the
Bye
best.
bye.
See ya. Bye.
Bye bye.